Hello, Foundry. We are excited that you are joining us again today as we are gathering each Thursday in this series just to kind of dive a little bit deeper and to talk about some of the concepts that we are discussing each Sunday morning, trying to dig a little bit deeper, give some practical tools, and to really impact what some of these ideas and these concepts look like in our real life. So today we're going to be concluding our 3-week series talking about the idea of generosity. This week we talked about the idea of generosity involving your gifts, involving your talents, and we're excited to dive a little bit deeper. Scott again is here with me. Scott, do you want to just say hello to everyone?
Hey, how's it going?
Hey,
Yeah.
yeah. So we're gonna dive right in today into this conversation, kind of looking at two major categories that we will kind of unpack what they look like. The first is just what are some helpful tools in us understanding and utilizing our talents and our skills, and then what are some of the potential pitfalls that we fall into when it comes to our giftings and our talents. So, Scott, let me just put that first question out to you. When you are trying to discover your gifts and your talents, what are some of the tools or the things that have aided you in trying to figure out what those are for you?
Yeah. So one of the things, like I remember like being a young like follower of Jesus, and like the first time I ever heard the phrase like spiritual gifts. Um, and I've always had this strange relationship with like, okay, like this idea that there's some kind of like, in every follower of Jesus, there's like this supernatural, like God wants to use you in these specific ways, and listing them and trying to find yourself in them and take tests about them. Um, which we'll talk about that in a minute. But then like matching that to like just this practical, like real world, like here's the stuff I'm good at, here's the stuff I'm passionate about, here's my story, where I grew up, the heartbreaks, the upsides, like all of the things there. One of the things I just was thinking about first was the power of relationships to sort of speak into this deal, like not letting everyone else sort of dictate for me what am I supposed to do with my life, but I can think about the most pivotal sort of turns in my story were accompanied by people who were giving some version of I see this in you.
Mm.
Like, hey, I'm thinking about, which means I have to like be willing to be vulnerable about it, right?
Yeah.
But also like but also the space created to hear and receive, like, yeah, I think that is a direction, or hey, you're doing this one thing but I actually think it's this other thing, right? Like I was in a band for years, and loved music. There were some I see in you conversations that were like, hey, like you might really love to do this. It seems like there's another chapter, in hearing that just from a different story, right? Like, but I think about the critical moments of that, creating space for relationships where I'm like thinking about that strategically and well, and revisiting that in seasons is at least something that comes to mind for me in this. I can think about those people and I can think about those moments. I don't know, man. How about you?
Yeah. Well, let me ask one more question kind of to dive a little bit deeper on that. And that is, how do you, when you think about those relationships, how do you determine who are voices that should be heard in that conversation? Because
Yeah, that's good,
there's
right?
anyone that wants to give their input and speak into your ears at any time.
Yeah, I think we have to be careful with that, don't we? We have to be careful because there is like that family of origin, like you're the fourth generation baker, you got
Yeah.
to take the family business, and like there is that kind of pressure on us, right? In our families of origin, the genogram,
Mhm.
there's the cultural expectations. I know for me, the call to ministry was sort of matched to this idea. My guidance counselor in high school said, God helps those who help themselves. And I was like, I don't know what that means. I think it means that you don't think I'm going to make a lot of money. And maybe I should think about that. Like, as I wanted to. So like, I think there is this, this interesting thing where we want to, on some level, like there's some ways in which we find our giftings by like doing things in crowds and groups of people. but I think it's those private moments, maybe in our own prayer life, coupled with um, maybe a steady diet of a handful
Yeah.
of mentors or people that are helping us process maybe the seasonality. Because maybe I'm called to plant a church, which was obviously part of my story, but there was really good advice that someone gave to me that was like, hey, I think you should wait till you're 30 to do that, because I think you got to suffer a little bit more. I think you got to take a few more punches in life, like before you can stand in front of people and lead them through deep, dark despair. And I was like, that's a little dark. And in hindsight, I was like, that dude knew what he was talking about. Like,
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like, in my life, because I'm like an Enneagram 3 and I love the appearance of achievement, I think I can fall into getting overly consumed with like what a crowd of people think I should be doing at any given point in time. So that smaller circle is really important to me, because we can cut through like the exterior, like
Yeah.
not just like, hey, what is it that you're doing that's like getting results or making people happy, but what are you called to do? Because like if I've got to turn it at all, I'm probably going to disappoint people,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And so that's for me. I think that the interplay of relationships there too. And I think those people also can look beneath the surface of my motivations. Like, is my motivation status quo, or is my motivation to like, hey, I actually think there's some momentum in this direction, or efficacy of Gift's passion story. What's it look like for you, man? Like that same deal.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I guess kind of the two questions. I think tying in kind of what you were asking first, and second, like utilizing tools such as like you've mentioned a few times since we've had these conversations, the Enneagram or
Mm-hmm.
other personality type indicators. I have found to be helpful,
Yeah,
whether that is Myers Briggs, that is Strength Finders.
yeah,
Less so some of the more recent ones. If you're on Facebook and there's like a random Adobe, what creative type are you, or
yeah. I don't have
what
time for that.
what Harry Potter house do you live in, or whatnot. But also having people surrounding you, I think, that understand you. So like spending time taking these tests to learn a little bit more about you and your intricacies, but also surrounding yourself with people who uh, both reaffirm what is brought
Yeah.
out in those tests, but also say, "Hey, actually, you see yourself in this way," and that's probably not accurate.
Yeah.
I actually have found in the course of taking those tests, a lot of times it's helpful for me to have someone next to me who knows me well, such as my wife, to kind of
Yeah.
help guide me, because I can tend to overthink things or hyper contextualize
Mm-hmm.
an answer on that. So, spending time, I think, both digging into some of those personality type indicators, or understanding who you are through them, or your strengths through them. But then I think also surrounding yourself with people, like you were saying, who can speak more in depth into your lives in those given ways, and try to help bring out the best in you, and bring out those gifts that maybe you struggle to see, or that
Yeah.
other people maybe even struggle to see.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually, I don't know why I feel like compelled to say this, but like,
Yeah.
I think like for you and I in the roles that we find ourselves in right now, there is, but I think it goes beyond our respective roles. I think it's expected of our roles. I think every person that would be watching or interacting with this thing that we're doing has the capacity to do that for someone else.
Hmm.
Like, has the capacity to say, Austin, when I like, I see this in you, or hey, I don't know if you've ever thought about, have you ever considered this thing?
Yeah.
And again, not to be like, I'm trying to live your life for you in a particular way or write the thing that you should do, but there is such like there's such power in
Hmm.
blessing,
Yeah.
right? And there's such power in just somebody like giving us permission to dream
Hmm.
a little bit further about what God might do in our story. Like, and that is something I kind of hope as we get older, like when I'm on the younger side of it, I'm like, I want that from everybody else, but and even in my 40s, I want that from everyone else. Yes, please tell me what I should do with my life. Let me know I want to know what I'm doing that's resonating in the world.
Yeah.
But I think there's power in this conversation of reciprocating that.
Mm.
Like, so that we're not just like, the idea of gifting and calling is not just this mystical, I need my breakfast cereal to point me in the direction of which city I'm supposed to live in next and what I'm supposed to do there and what's the intersection of gifts, passion, story that should result in me feeling fulfilled in the world. I part of the obsession, I think, is self with that.
Mm.
And one of the ways we can fight against that isn't just having community, but I think also being that community. I know that's a little bit of a digression, but like, I think it's really important for this conversation.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. I think that even, if we are putting ourselves in the role of either position of
Mhm.
being the one looking for feedback or the one kind of giving that feedback to different people, I think that there's a burden placed on vulnerability for
Yeah.
both of those
Yeah.
individuals as well, because if I'm coming to you and I'm saying, hey, Scott, what is it that you see in me? Like, can you tell
Mhm.
me different things that you see? Can you help me understand my gifts? And yet you don't know me at all. How can you even speak into that?
Yeah.
But at the same time, if I'm going, hey, Scott, I want you to speak into my life, and you're just spitting back generic things and not really talking through
Yeah.
what's happened in your life, it can really limit the impact, I think, that people can have, or that we can have, helping other people live out their best story in that way.
Yeah. 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 I think that's good. That's good. Yeah. It really, and we're talking about even just lowering a posture of defensiveness,
Mm,
like I think that's the easy part of like crowdsourcing calling is that it it doesn't it's sort of easy to kind of speak into like what other people kind of project onto
yeah,
you, to lower our defensiveness and sort of say, hey, where does that land, where does it not land, and like I think there's a posture,
yeah,
conversation in this too, for sure.
yeah, definitely. So something you've brought up a few times in our conversation, I know we've done some classes related to it
Mm.
too, is the gifts, passions, uh, what's the last one? Gives passion
Story.
story.
Yeah. Yeah.
The GPS. Could you tell us a little bit about like what that assessment is and kind of the outcomes of that?
Yeah, and let me just get a little bit insider really fast, and then I'll broaden it out. Like, when I was like 13, 14, 15, like starting to acquaint myself to church, I would read about these like spiritual gifts, and I was like, okay, they were doing these assessments, and then I was like, what is that? So what does a teaching gift mean? Does it mean I have to be a teacher? Like, and that those are all really good, and I think they're really well intentioned. I think it's helpful for us though to think about a Venn diagram of gifts and passion and story, and that's not language I've come up with. That's a book called Find Your Place, by Rob Wegner, and but there's an assessment, I think, kind of out of that book. So it posits this idea of gifts, meaning the combo of maybe spiritual gifts, but also then just the stuff I'm good at. The passions, meaning like there is some stuff in our life that just we are wired to like think about and just get like intense about. And we're like the one ready at the lunch table to talk about it. Everyone else is like, I don't know. I watched this thing on HBO Max last night though.
Yeah.
And then our story, like our specific story in terms of the season of life that we're in, maybe the place in which we've come up, maybe a unique thing that's happened to us. And the gifts, passion, story assessment aims to sort of take the idea of spiritual gifts, but overlay those things on top of one another to think about that through the lens of, okay, so maybe I have a teaching gift, but the way in which I might express that looks different than you, Austin, who may also have a teaching gift.
Yeah.
Like, because in churches, which is our context, we tend to get obsessed with the person and people on the stage, right? the person leading music and the person and sort of go, so if I have a teaching gift, but it looks different than the teaching gift that I'm seeing, it can become a bit of a square peg round hole thing. So that's the gifts, passions, story, assessment, GPS. It's the one I tend to share with people that they're asking this question, because it's more comprehensive than just like a spiritual gifts inventory, which is I know very insider language, or a Myers-Briggs, which tends to be very focused on just a personality bend, but doesn't consider. I often say with like some of those, like, yeah, just because you're told that you're direct doesn't give you permission to be a jerk to these first.
Yeah.
I have permission. I've got a just the disc profile says I'm whatever. So
yeah, that's good stuff. Let's turn the conversation and look a little bit more at the opposite, because I think that some of us are good at tools, but struggle maybe with some of these pitfalls or roadblocks that we see in actually living out our giftings, or leaning into our giftings and maximizing them. And I know one that I feel like I've heard you talk a lot about, and Matt talked about on Sundays, this idea of comparison. Could you talk a little bit about how you've seen that kind of play out, but then also how you kind of personally try to avoid comparison in this conversation?
Man, oh man. I think
Enneagram 3.
Yes, comparison and the fear of failure, which I think are
Yeah.
In tandem, right? I project what I think I know about you to what I know about myself. Like what and when I think about your story, it's glamorous. There's no struggle. Everything's easy. You're good at this thing. But if I don't see that in me, I'm like, oh shoot, and I like self disqualify. And I think there's a lot of people in the kingdom of God, in the capital C church, who have disqualified themselves from really important things that God may have for them to do, because there's maybe not a picture in front of them of like where it's being done. And then like projecting like, well, if I can't do it that way, then maybe I don't have a role to play and I just shouldn't do it at all. And man, I have talked myself out of rooms. I have talked myself out of engaging in places where I think that maybe God was inviting me, because I've let comparison like cripple and paralyze me, and I'd say the fear of failure, like just not seeing the blessing of like part of what we learn about our gifts is through trial and error, is through trying a new thing, is through that like, okay, well, I'm going to give this a go. Part of, I think, how we fight that is we actually get involved in it. We actually start to get our hands dirty somewhere. And because like when I'm just kind of in my own head pontificating, I don't do anything. I just go about my business. And I think there's actually churches and organizations are full of people who are, sitting in their break rooms having these kind of big ideas or God thoughts, and they're not doing anything with them because of comparison, fear of failure. And I actually think a great place to start is by starting. And and now what I hope is true of an organization I'm a part of is that there is space within that to sort of build like the scorecard that God has for me, versus like the one that like I'm, like maybe articulating. So I think a good example is even like the longer we do certain things we're involved in, we realize like we can kind of see the beauty and the compliment that we bring to that thing, and we're not like as defensive, right? Like the definitions of success might look a little bit different because we're in it. Maybe we see like I have projected in the past, like, if it doesn't look like this, it's not successful. And then you start to do some things, like I'll use the band as an example, like metrics for like what makes a successful, thing. Like the longer we did it, the more it's like, man, we were sort of like, there's metrics that we care about, Like we weren't trying to be this thing or that thing. Now there's give and take with that, and there's blessings and whatever. But if you just like, you'd be robbed of all of the fun and all of the good times if you just spend all of your life obsessing over the fact that you're not doing what U2 is doing or Metallica is doing. And dating myself in terms of what would be like the preeminent, you know, well, they're all still playing arenas, but still, you know,
yeah.
but I would have robbed myself of so much. And so I do think you need to get involved in that. I don't know. What do you make of that, Austin, as far as like pitfalls and paralysis there? I mean, what does that look like for you?
Yeah. I mean, I think that one, I guess that just expands a little bit on kind of even what you're saying is just the the ability or the times that I would kind of minimize the impact that I could have.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and a lot of this again plays into the comparison thing, but
Yeah.
you know, like I remember being in a band when I was younger, and we played this one show with a band that was kind of a side project called Advent that
Mm-hmm.
had just come out. They just put an EP out, and it was like 15 people there. Like no one was there at all. But this is like, oh, the band that they were previously a part of was a well-known band, probably touring and playing for thousands of people at a time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's in those moments that like sometimes you go to the best shows, you go to the best concerts
Yeah, for real.
when there's no one else there. And I think that's true in terms of even our giftings. You know, like I think of Jeff Thompson at 1012 Sports. If he was like, man, I need to be, I don't know, Lamar Jackson in order to use my giftings of playing football, well, then he may never actually go and impact people because he's not Lamar Jackson. But if he goes, hey, man, I have a gifting with football, and what I can do is organize this and create some youth leagues. And I may not be impacting, you know, 120,000 people every single week or millions of people tuning in on Sunday mornings, but I can impact 80 kids a year. Well, that's a great impact, but I think a lot of times we tend to minimize that. We tend to say, hey, unless my gifts are this like ultimate expression, unless my talent, unless my story is this ultimate expression, then it doesn't really matter. I can't really lean into that. I
Yeah.
think that's one that I've seen in my life for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that goes back to, again, when we hear, and even just like media that is not like faith-based media, I think does paint this idea of calling as this mystical, like the skies open up and the
Mm-hmm.
light changes and you have this sense of clarity about like the next 10 steps of life. And I really think it is just like, hey, there's a little bit more at a time.
Yeah.
Here's a little bit more at a time, and then here's a little bit more at a time. Just to take me living in Baltimore and planting the foundry, like that was birthed out of someone saying across from the table from me at an Italian restaurant in Danville, Indiana, like, dude, you talk about the East Coast a lot, and you talk about Baltimore a lot. Have you ever like thought about going back that way? And that's my boss. Like my boss
Yeah.
going like, you're pretty into that. Like, have you ever thought about that? And I hadn't. Like I literally hadn't. Now, if I had the next 10 steps, I think I would have gotten paralyzed because if I knew it ended in Federal Hill and I knew it ended with like, living in the city, and I would have been like, hey, I'm doing things in Danville, which is not a comparable experiential context. It's not
Yeah.
it like I just would have like a little bit at a time, right? And I do think it begins with kind of like, not like not selling ourselves short or small, like going, oh, I just need to do this small little thing. I can't dream big. But stewarding the present,
Mm-hmm.
and going, here, what am I gifted with?
Yeah.
What's in my hands right now? What's the part of my gifts and passions or story that I can steward in this moment? And then getting a little bit more of a glimpse. And like you said, like that, I think the band analogy, we both
Mm-hmm.
went there. It is like, it's funny things. Like, I remember the band Under Oath, who's huge
Mm-hmm.
now, like, played before us at a at like a show, and it's like, oh, there's like they're like the opening band, and there's like 30 hardcore kids looking angry at the
Yeah.
universe that looked a little more angry at the ska band than them. But like, 30 kids in Waldorf, Maryland who didn't give a rip about Under Oath are now like, dude, I saw Under Oath, like
Yeah.
when they got huge. And I do think that's like, so the stewardship of that is obviously, if you're one of the folks in Under Oath at that time, like that is a show that the stewardship of that moment, 30 people in a terrible place to play music,
Yeah.
with a terrible ska band playing, well, we weren't terrible, but but it was a terrible show. I remember that. Like
Yeah.
it was like, man, there's a stewardship of that moment that like paves the way to the sold out arenas too, and or even just a really fun run with your friends, which is what my band ended up being, right? Like the failure to steward that moment is a precursor to bitterness, to missing out on the stuff that's in front of us that would be a blessing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that it also, if we're not careful with that, we miss the downstream ripples, if you will. Like,
For sure.
because I think when we find ourselves in the seat of your former boss sitting down, a lot of times I don't feel like I remember those conversations that impact people. Like, for them, it's this pivotal conversation that's life changing and that led them down this direction. And now Scott has planted a church, and now hundreds of people in the city have been impacted because of that. And for your boss, he may be like, I mean, I remember grabbing lunch that one time, but I don't remember having this specific conversation, and so we may miss some of those, just how far it extends, even if we aren't the ones playing the arenas long term. It can really make an impact in a huge, huge way.
Yeah. I know we like, this is sort of independent of Sunday morning, but I think like that, like one of the things Matt did when he did like the bass line with Billie Jean, like the addition of the bass line, which is this thing you don't think about, he used the music analogy, so it seems to be our trend for today.
Yeah.
but yeah, those unspoken things that are part of what brings out like the full array of like what musicianship is actually there. Like, and it's not like the thing that the average person is like, yes, the absence of the bass line here is the difference between a number 1 and number 30 single. Like,
Yeah.
but having a sense of just like there is a role that I'm playing in this, and being, again, I think what we're really talking about is this idea that maybe that future minded, like, legacy kind of stuff really does begin with a stewardship of the ordinary. But I think also an openness to continue to grow, continue to say, hey, what is God doing in this season of my life? We not just so like a good example of that, right? You and I deal with this, or you meet someone that's moved to Baltimore and they're like, well, I'm only going to be here for a short time, so I don't know if I'll really get that involved. And I'm like, you don't know the impact of some of the people in the Foundry's story that have been really impactful have only been part of the Foundry for a really short time. I think of one person who was studying to be a chaplain and was here for a short time, knew that long term he was going back to be closer to kids and family, and like made a tremendous impact, not just in our city, but like in my life and in the life of people, because he didn't just go, well, I'm only going to be here for a short time, so I probably should just go home and watch Netflix every night. Like I probably should just, eat at Popeyes every evening and quietly tend to my business and tick the days off the calendar. Like, and I hope that in that we also impacted him, like probably whatever he's doing now, like is better for maybe the practice that got it. But I think we do that.
Yeah.
And we disqualify, like, well, I've got a, I just had a baby, or it's a busy season. And it's not to say there's not times we shouldn't step back. But I think this is the essence of story. Like,
Yeah.
The essence of story is, okay, I just had a baby, so it's going to look different than it looked last year.
Mm-hmm.
Or, hey, we've gone through a pandemic, so perhaps the gifting that I have is adapted to, it looks different.
Yeah.
Because the global moment that we're in is different. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think another, even kind of jumping on that, another kind of pitfall that I have found myself in, and I feel like a lot of people that I have conversations with also find themselves in, is this idea of balancing kind of my talents, my talents that are life giving, and then my
Mm-hmm.
talents that are just skills that I have that
Yeah.
people want me to do, but they actually are incredibly draining. But then balancing that out as well with the needs that maybe an organization has, or a city has, or the relationships I am in have. Have you had kind of that experience as well, and kind of how have you kind of navigated that?
Yeah. So I have, and I think we probably all have. There is like that level, you're right. Like you begin to, well, and even now, right? Like things that really did give me life at one point in time. I'm
Mhm.
like in another season of life, I'm like, I don't have time for that. Like that is
Yeah.
so not like what I enjoy doing anymore. And so I do think we have to have a level of like introspection, right? We have to accompany this, and maybe with the organization that we're serving in, being able to say, hey, for now, like,
Mm.
for example, like if I worked for an organization where I might, that's where I might look at a performance review and go, okay, not just are they telling me, am I doing the things that are expected of me, but I get a chance to say, hey, I think I'm growing a little more passionate in this area and a little less passionate in this area. And, and at the end of the day, if the answer is still, you got to fill out the stinking, credit card thing and get in your expense reports, it's like, well, is there anyone ever that's like enjoyed that? No, nobody enjoys that. But like, I don't enjoy responding to every email, but I can't not ever, answer email. Like that's
Yeah.
not, but so that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about personal irresponsibility. We're talking about, hey, like we have to think about at different times, like the thing that we're doing. Are the ways in which the organization has changed or shifted or evolved, does it need to look different than it did
Mm.
a year ago? I mean, you mentioned Jeff earlier, and like when I think about 10-12
Yeah.
sports, it's like a wider range of children and young people impacted in a community, and good success like they've had. It breeds a couple of things. First of all, it breeds lots of people with lots of good ideas wanting to go, oh my goodness, I trust them. So
Yeah.
now we need a youth of a youth football league, and a this thing and a that thing. And there's some level where there's a pressure perhaps to stay true to the calling that you have. But then there's also, with a wider maybe array of people wanting to be on board with it, or maybe a wider range of talents coming to the table,
Mm.
where you can begin to have the freedom to say, hey, you know what, like it's okay if someone else is the one doing maybe the job training side of this, because I might be better suited for this. So I think you have to set aside some times or seasons, personally, maybe corporately, to kind of, I mean, for me, it's kind of, I operate best in this one about twice a year. I'm kind of going, what are the things I need to stop doing?
Mm.
Like, is there anything that like I'm keeping someone else from stepping into what God may have for them, because I won't share, or I need the badge of honor of like, look how busy he is. And Austin, you can probably speak to better than I am how effective I am at that. But like, but at least like my intention is
Yeah.
to, because I think that's just like a natural, we think about like how many, well, just practically. Okay. So the Foundry's 8 years old. how many roles have you had, like, in our church,
Yeah.
right? Like over 8 years. Um, like there's all kinds of things you've done
Hmm.
that, like, okay, we don't need that now, or that looks different now.
Yeah.
Like, or or you're good at both of these things, but to do this in this moment, to do the thing maybe that God's wired you or called you to do or excites you in this moment, I need to lean into this, and this is the thing I will keep and maintain and make sure is not like bleeding, like, at any point in time.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. Like I think of, you know, we mentioned Jeff, but I think of sports even with some of this. Like there are some, players that are the best at being the second best player on a team, and
Mhm.
uh, that may be life giving to them. But the moment that they're put in this position where they're supposed to be the best, they just can't handle it, and it's now become this incredibly draining thing to actually live into their
Mhm.
talents.
Yeah.
Or a coach that is like, hey, you're a coach that builds up the young players and you can make them a serviceable team, but that doesn't make you a championship coach. And like that's okay, like,
Mhm.
and realizing that and knowing ourselves, and knowing kind of where we fit in, but also having the balance of like, yeah, but sometimes my team needs me to step into this role. Sometimes I
Yeah.
need to be the person stacking chairs, is also kind of important
Yeah,
there.
yeah, I think so. I want to come back to this in a minute.
Yeah.
So I think you just hit something really important, like the I don't stack chairs mindset.
Yeah.
Like, I know for me, like, I, even if I'm not the person that should stack chairs at a particular moment, I always want to have a heart that's like, but I'm willing in the
Hmm.
things that I care about. If stacking chairs is what I got to do to, like, for us to see the flourishing in an area, like that's those are the kind of people I want on my team, right?
Yeah.
Like, if I gotta plunge a toilet, how many toilets did we plunge the first few weeks? Like, if I gotta
Yeah.
plunge toilets, or I gotta, if this is what it takes to get this thing done and to see flourishing, I like this idea of, like, I'm gonna sit up in my office and only do my little niche thing, like I think is antithetical to, like, a broader
Hmm.
calling conversation. But then within that, there is like seeing and protecting one another's giftings to say, hey, like, we know that it is an organization, it changes, evolves, the needs shift, you know there's still going to need to be toilets plunged, chairs stacked, but we can think about a system that engages that differently. I don't know. As a leader, I always want to have a heart that's like, yeah, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes.
Yeah.
My question for you, Austin, though, but like from the seat of, like, someone who's working for a team, and kind of sensing in yourself, I mentioned different roles that you've
Hmm.
played, identifying those changes of seasons. What is that like? Because sometimes maybe it's really obvious to you, maybe other times it's more nuanced. Talk about that tension a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are a few factors that play into kind of how you see those seasons changing. I think one of the most obvious, at least for me, is when I am doing something that even I'm talented at, but is completely draining, or I'm just plugging a hole and it's not a life giving thing. And I have pushed far beyond where I should, as I start to feel burned out. I start to
Mhm.
feel like just worn out, exhausted, like this isn't where I need to be serving in this capacity. And as you mentioned, some of those things, it's like, well, yeah, but we still got to stack chairs. We still got to do credit card reconciliations, whatever it is. We still got to go through the motions of that thing. That's part of the bigger thing that
Yep.
we have to do. And having a servant's heart, I think, is important in that too. I think the other thing that I have seen, especially recently, is just sometimes there is a person behind me or serving under me that is like ready to take over the role and ready to take over the position, probably better than I can do juggling five or six things because that is their thing. Um, and when I realize that, handing it over and just saying, hey, like, I trust you completely to do what you need to do here. Because ultimately, then that person is probably living into their talents that are life-giving, and their talents that they can maximize, as opposed to me, who is trying to just juggle all of these things and trying to, you know, do them well, sure, but still trying to do six things at once, as opposed to giving that up.
Yeah, yeah. And the unresourceful self like resents that, right? They're
Yeah.
coming at me. They have a opinion about how this should be done, and they don't like how I'm doing it. Like the resourceful self goes, well, maybe this is an opportunity
Hmm.
to see maybe the pivot. Like we're tired of saying that word. It was a good word 2 years ago. Maybe hey, what's the next turn of where this journey is taking me?
Yeah.
Like to another part within the organization that's like, man, I've always wanted to get to this, but I just never had the time to do it. Like or whatever that might look like. I think seeing those things as like blessings and not threats.
Yeah.
It's easy I think for us to say in this moment. Obviously we know it to be a lot messier when we're like, yeah, but I like it. I don't know, or can they really do it? I think Michael Hyatt talks about like things that like delight and things that drain. And
Mm-hmm.
like if I can begin to identify the things that drain me, like right, there's some things that are just being responsible in the roles that we find. Like, you know, if we are working with young people, there's safety protocols we might find
Sure.
draining, but suck it up, man. Like
Yeah.
we're to protect young people. But like those areas where we can identify what is it about that thing that's draining, maybe some of the things that detect where we need to change the season a bit, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that too, a pitfall we can come into with that, and also just leaning into our giftings, is this idea of perfection, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and how I would define perfection. You know, when you talk about this idea of someone coming up kind of behind us or underneath us, and being ready to hand it over, a lot of times that person does it differently because they're just a different person, and it's really easy for us to talk ourselves out of handing it over because, like, well, they won't do it the way that I did it. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like if Scott was to say, hey, I want to preach, I've been preaching 40 times a year, now I want to preach 20 times a year. No matter who you hand those other 20 times to, it's going to be different because it's not
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And we can conflate our view of what we're doing in our work with this idea of perfection, which inhibits our ability to hand it off, but also inhibits our ability to kind of lean into to other areas.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you got me like I just go in there because I was thinking about like how like so much if I were to go back and listen to myself speak in like
Hmm.
2003 or whatever, like how much that was trying to find a voice,
Yeah.
which is largely like copying the influencers that impacted you, right?
Yeah.
Like it was like and like having to sort of find like your own unique like way in which you communicate like the things that is put on your heart and like and so much of how I got there was the space given to me,
Mm.
the space given to me where it wasn't just like, well, you're an idiot, do it this way. um even like things that were like, oh, that went really well, like you really crushed it, but like in my own spirit I was like, yeah, but that I'm not really like a screamy guy.
Mm.
Like I don't know if it's like, you know, if that's like the mode that I want to go. Like there was even so, but what we're talking this space. Like when you said that, I was like, but that's so right. Like that space afforded to me, and now tides turn, right, flipped. Like there's this tension of like protection. Like
Mm.
okay, well, yeah, someone else can do this 20 times a year, but I got to make sure they do it the right way,
Mm.
which is not something I would say or language I would use. But if someone did do it differently, and go, well, huh,
Yeah.
I'd never think about doing it that way. Like, huh, that's crazy. Um, yeah, and that would never work in my voice. Like you know, there's things that you do that I would go, man, I would just seem so like like I'm reaching, you know, if I
Sure.
tried to do it that way, or and likely vice versa. Like, but I just thought about the space when you said that. I was like, man, I'm old. I'm old, this many years old now, that I'm like, man, I remember like so much of that was the space given to me to like get
Hmm.
up and like just copycat all of the, like I was talking with my daughter about this, like you can listen to like back to music, like your band CD, and be like, oh, I remember what song I was listening to. Like
Hmm.
we like the bass line from Hello Rock Views by Less Than Jake, and so like that's why there's a lot of mids in that bass line.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
or like, oh, we were listening to Welcome to the Jungle, and so you can hear the brick dun, 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 dun.
Yeah. Well, and I think of with this idea of perfection, kind of I think about there's a podcast I listened to. It's probably a couple years ago now that I think Malcolm Gladwell put out, um, one of his revisionist history, and he was talking about the song Hallelujah,
Mhm.
which is like a classic that everyone's heard, everyone knows it.
Yeah,
But the beauty of that song is Jeff Buckley, I think, was the one who wrote it, and when he wrote it, he was like, "I'm just presenting it as like I'm finally okay enough to present it, even with all of the errors that it has." Um, but I think the beauty that has spun out of that is then, because it's not this thing that he held so tightly to and was like, this is perfect and this is the only way to do it. And one, it allows him to release a song that we all would say is like a classic that everyone knows. But it's also allowed all of these other artists to come after him and to reinterpret the song in their own form and in
mhm.
their own variety, and put it out in their spin on it, which then
Yeah,
creates more beautiful art, which is just a really interesting and cool way to do that and to think about
yeah,
it as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think like, so if I was like if I was talking to like the 20-year-old version of me that like was
Hmm.
feeling this tension of like feeling micromanaged, which I, like I said, I just told you I didn't, but like, but if I did, I think I would probably be asking like, is there something I can begin to do or model that sort of shows the kind of feedback I want to receive, or um, is there a way I can workshop or to try on some of these things that I might feel a little bit led to, um, like obviously I have to take some level of risk there, but like within an organization I love, also sort of being able to just know tone wise, like, hey, here's where there is some freedom that I can begin to innovate in,
Yeah.
like, because as a younger leader, you always are like, there's a it's what's so cool about this, like, I feel called, I'm ready, and we sometimes feel like people are patting us on the head and going, there, that's cute, but
Hmm.
like there are some places we can start,
Yeah.
and like, and yeah, on the other side, like this idea of how many times we do nothing because we're like, well, it's I don't have 10,000 hours to give to it today. Like,
Yeah.
how many people in a church community are there that like probably have some capacity to just kind of turn the wrench a quarter turn, with like moving us forward in vision and mission, but they're like, yeah, but I don't have like 10 hours to do it.
Yeah.
Like, and again, I think we're coming back to not negating like the thing that might be a 15-minute lift, the
Yeah.
thing that might be hey, have you ever thought about this kind of,
Hmm.
taking the risk that like the organization you love's like, nope, hadn't thought about it one time, like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but at least that's clarifying, right? Like, but in our head, in our presentments, nobody's noticing, nobody's whatever, nobody's like, and I do think you like, not, it's obviously a way to do this poorly. Like, I do think you have to like express that tension in some kind of
Mm.
way. Like, hey, I'm feeling like here's an area where we could maybe begin to innovate. And have you ever thought about this? And I'm kind of passionate about it if it is a passion, but you don't have the right person.
Yeah.
Like, um, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think one more thing I would just add, kind of as we're wrapping up too, is uh, in those rules, trying to find yourself in a position where you trust the organization, or you trust the
Yeah.
person kind of providing that mentorship, that like not only are they going to give you the space to fail, but they're going to give you the space to fail in the right way, and not
Yeah.
fail in these ways where you're just falling on your face,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I could say that many years ago, coming into the foundry as a 23-year-old kid,
Mhm.
like, you gave me opportunities to do things, and you weren't going to let me fall on my face, but you were going to let me fail a little bit, because that's part of learning, that's part of growing, that's part
Yeah.
of understanding our gifts and skills and passions and stories and all of that.
Yeah.
um,
For real.
but at the same time, you're not going to allow me to totally just be
Mm.
wrecked for no reason.
Yeah. 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 I think that's right. Like the idea of just like those moments of pain, or those moments of tension really do become those clarifying, galvanizing moments of, okay, well, I'm trying this, and then I did it, and I felt really great about it, or I did it, and now I feel, but I actually feel it's a little bit more like this. I think it's a little bit more. It's not the big room; it's the smaller spaces. It's
Yeah.
not, it's not 600 million Instagram followers. It's the least of these, and in a particular group of people, or it's behind the scenes in ways that like nobody will ever know what I actually do.
Mm.
And I'm 100% okay with that, because I know that like every person that like comes through and is empowered, whatever it is, we don't get there without like the some level of uncomfortability,
Yeah.
um, which again is antithetical to the idea that I just feel called one day and everything just kind of moves. Like it, this is maybe insider, but like the idea of the conference story, like the thing that just we all want kind of a version of calling that resembles this conference story. Like I felt attention, I I stepped forward, and then like there's this ripple effect of impact. And the person communicating at a conference probably has about 2.5 minutes to get that story out.
Yeah.
You know, so there's a lot of the gaps in between that are missing. But the false. So the two things we think we miss is that everything's up and to the right. Usually in those stories, it's bigger, better,
Hmm.
and you got to really clarify your definitions of bigger and better in that case, because that's a pretty subjective deal,
Yeah.
right? The other is that there's always the tension of like what happens in between those moments, which are moments of confusion, a lack of clarity, and it's the people that kind of come along and help us walk in that story that are helping us actually get there and define it. So
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that's a good place to kind of land the plane today. We appreciate you guys if you are tuning in live, or if you are watching after the fact. We hope that this conversation and the previous ones we've had have been helpful. Just so you all know, if you are watching, we won't be having one of these next week, as Feed More, Be More is this Sunday, which if you haven't, make sure to sign up for that. But we will be back in the following series, which will be our Lent series, looking at the book of Ezekiel, called Despair and Hope. Continuing to have some of these conversations on Thursdays at noon. And we hope that you will join us then. We'll see you all.
yeah, have a